Hello everyone, and greetings from Mexico. In this presentation, I'll focus on two questions. First, how does literacy contribute to the quality of a written Bible translation? Or put another way, what are the things we can do better when literacy is a central component of a translation project? And second, how can OBT programs incorporate WRBT tools and vice versa? And so note that we're focused on the period from drafting to publication of a translation, and we're not thinking about the value of literacy in scripture engagement. And we're not thinking about how literacy and orality might complement each other in scripture engagement. Our focus here is limited to the creation of the translation. Thanks to Joshua Frost, Evelyn Gahn, Nathan Payne, and Rob Taylor for a great Zoom call helping me think through some of these questions. Thanks to Chris Toller for ongoing conversations over our last 10 years in Mexico together. And thanks to Brian Kelly for a helpful article, preliminary questions to consider when looking at an oral translation approach. Before we get started, let's talk about process and some definitions. In written Bible translation programs, we draft and edit a written document which is later published as a written document. And for many years now, it has been assumed that those written translations will also be recorded. In oral Bible translation programs, we draft and edit a recording which is later published as a recording. It is possible to move between the oral and written modes. For example, a team can internalize and then draft scripture portions as an audio file, then go on to transcribe and continue on in a written Bible translation program. As another example, we can begin with oral drafting and oral editing, then publish an oral translation, and then we can follow the purple arrow, and we can use the published oral translation as input into a written Bible translation program. So in summary, the beginning is quite distinct. The difference between oral drafting and written drafting is significant. And while in one sense the end can be the same, audio files, MP3 files are similar, the reality is the end is quite different. A published oral translation and a published written translation have meaningful differences. Okay, now that we have some processes and terms laid out, I'd like to give you a little background about myself because, like all of us, my own experiences have shaped how I think about OBT and WRBT. My family has been in the state of Guerrero in Mexico with SIL since 2013. My wife's and my first assignment with SIL Mexico was to study the METPA language. This involved memorizing 1,000 words to include spelling them correctly, and it involved telling stories in METPA, translating stories from METPA to Spanish, and glossing METPA texts. As you can see, our preparation to serve as translation advisors presumed a strong focus on literacy. Since 2017, we've been working with 4 Bible translation teams of 2 translators each, plus 1 digital specialist. They are all members of a denomination called Las Iglesias Cristianas Tlapanecas. The 4 varieties of the METPA language are closely related, and it is important to the denomination that the translations closely follow one another. This has been an important planning factor leading us to continue on as a WRBT project and not consider transitioning to an OBT project. Prior to 2017, another SIL team had been working with the METPA translation teams. From the 1990s to 2017, the teams had drafted 104 books of the Bible, but only 5 books were either consultant checked or published. Thankfully, the team has now consultant checked 54 books, and the Malinaltepec variety has consultant checked all but 5 New Testament books and is targeting publication in 2 to 3 years. At this point, only one of the 4 varieties has any undrafted books, and they expect to generally follow the other 3 existing translations as they draft, and so all of this makes oral drafting and oral Bible translation unlikely in this particular project. Through my experience with the METPA translation team and my experiences in basic writers' workshops in SIL Mexico, I've seen the importance of literacy, and so in 2020 I began developing Alpha Tiles, a literacy games app for Android devices. We've now localized the app into 58 languages. Last of all, the METPA Cluster Project's digital specialist, Cesar, continually updates and distributes pre-publication scripture apps and hymnal apps using Bloom and Reading App Builder. These apps usually include audio. So as you can see in my background, it has been a pretty traditional program in many respects, but we have been looking for innovative ways to support the translation while still functioning as a WRBT program. Okay, so let's dive into the first main section. How does literacy contribute to the quality of a translation? Key terms consistency is much easier to manage in a written Bible translation. Here we see to the left that in Matthew 12:8, the Teoquitlapa Metpa translation does not use the Metpa key term for Son of Man. To the right, we can see that there are 4 total places in Matthew where this key term is not represented as intended. At the very top, we can choose Faltan traducciones, or missing renderings, and quickly see that in each case, the verse should be edited to use the correct term for Son of Man. In an oral Bible translation, it is much more difficult to identify where key terms are represented incorrectly. Even with a modest list of 100 key terms, several thousand tokens may exist for all of the key terms combined. Also, in an oral Bible translation, when a required change is identified, how will the change be made? Will a whole section, verse, sentence, phrase, or word be re-recorded? What new checks might be required when a longer section is replaced? Or how is naturalness of the recording affected by replacing a shorter section? In other words, if only a single word is substituted, who with the required technical ability is available to splice and insert the original recording? Furthermore, the recording should be made by the same person and should be given in more or less the same cadence, pitch, etc. as the original recording. Please note, none of this is to say this can't be done. This is all regularly done by OBT teams, but it is a more time-consuming process. Revisions come at a higher cost in OBT programs. In contrast, in a written Bible translation, any member of the team with editing access can quickly make the required changes. Okay, but don't worry, I will also be mentioning in a bit ways in which OBT translations are more likely to have higher quality than WRBTs. So what we've said about key terms editing is really true generally. Editing a written Bible translation is easier than editing an oral Bible translation, whether key terms or anything else. However, sometimes this just means written translations are solving a problem that only they have, meaning a problem OBTs don't have to deal with. Consider these METPA words. All 4 forms are distinguished only by tone, vowel length, and or a final glottal stop. In the METPA Bible translations, we are constantly making minor edits to ensure the final written translation is accurate. OBTs don't have this concern. But still, the importance of ease of editing should be emphasized. For example, a translation can change because of a preferred pronunciation for town. Or we can select a new word for angel based on discussions with a consultant. One advantage we've seen in the METPA project is that in a written Bible translation project, the translators are continuously improving the translation. In drafting and team checking and community checking and consultant checking, improvements are regularly being made. Even for the Malinaltepec METPA translation team, who have only 5 books left to consult and check in the New Testament, they can still make a translation decision requiring a specific word change across 24 completed books relatively easily. Written Bible translations also manage well 2 other types of consistency. First, there are powerful tools in paratext that help you compare, for example, identical portions of the Synoptic Gospels. Second, it is easy to compare across multiple translations. In our METPA cluster project, the denomination has emphasized the importance of similarity among the 4 translations. As translation advisors, we frequently read the 4 drafts side by side to check consistency across the 4 translations. Literacy also empowers local translators to independently make use of numerous resources. Here we see a paratext screen showing the 4 METPA translations, a window with numerous Spanish translations, a Greek translations, 2 commentaries in Spanish, and an internal team notes file. I think we underestimate the importance of this aspect. The Bible translators, whether a written or oral project, are very frequently the same ones who will preach and teach Scripture within their community in the decades to come. When the translators develop the necessary skills and then build the habit of accessing various translations and other resources, this pays off both in a 10 to 15-year translation project and in all of the Scripture engagement that happens during the translation program and beyond it. Also, in written translation programs, it is easier to add footnotes, cross-references, and other supporting information. Finally, while this is not necessarily the case, a written translation is more likely to be received as authoritative than an oral translation. In summary, a written translation has inherent advantages in the areas of accuracy, paratextual information, access to resources, and acceptability. In my best attempt to be fair, I wanted to mention several advantages of OBTs before going on to the next section. OBTs are more likely to be more natural through the process of internalization and drafting in larger sections. Written Bible translations often suffer from a myopic verse level and below view. OBTs can incorporate expressive readings. OBTs do not require an orthography to begin, and so are unburdened by punctuation, SFM markers, footnotes, parallel references, etc. And because an orthography and literacy is not required, this allows for wider participation in the translation team. So now we're going to think about how we can improve WRBTs by drawing on orality-based tools and techniques, and also how we can improve OBTs by drawing on literacy-based tools and techniques. My hope is that after this, we can devote most of our discussion time to filling in the gaps in my presentation with insights from all of you from your experience in translation. I would like, if possible, to avoid some kind of Scopus-independent, abstract discussion of whether OBT or WRBT is better. Instead, I'd like to take it for granted that some teams are already engaged in OBT work and some teams are already engaged in WRBT work, and that those are both good things, and to focus on an opportunity to improve each translation program by drawing on a broader set of tools and techniques. Here are the 6 phases of translation as we operate in the METPA Cluster Project. We're going to use these 6 phases to structure our reflection. In the drafting phase, as mentioned previously, a WRBT program can use internalization prior to drafting, and the WRBT program can also use oral drafting. In an OBT program, I'm unaware of anyone that would suggest writing out a translation and then recording it. But a big question in an OBT project is if and when to begin transcription. At this point, it is probably too early to begin transcription of the quote-unquote written Bible translation, but the oral Bible translators could begin transcription activities simply as good practice for developing literacy skills. What else might you add? Make a note of a comment that you'd like to share in our discussion. In our team, during team checking, the translators regularly read a verse out loud both before and after editing. A practice we need to adopt is more regular reading of large sections. For OBT programs, they might consider beginning transcription activities if they haven't yet. Again, what else might you add? Make a note of any comments you'd like to share at the end. In 2017, we were struggling over several months to begin community checking in the 4th and final variety of METPA. To date, the translators had only drafted Scripture, and the church had not done any checking of Scripture. Finally, in a meeting, the elders of the church, with some of them crying, said, "We're sorry, we can't do this. We can't read, so how can we help check your work?" This was a big wake-up call for the translators and for me. To respond to this, first, we stopped talking about reading Scripture in checking sessions, and we began talking about listening to Scripture in checking sessions. We assured them that the translators would read the draft to the church, and over time, others would hopefully begin to read as well. Second, we began distributing apps with Scripture portions with audio, and we began distributing simple audio files with Scripture drafts. We also experimented with using Facebook to share videos with illustrations and text synchronized with audio. While this was a lot of work and not sustainable, meaning the Facebook videos, it was a helpful way to build initial interest in the checking sessions. One of the translators, Benito, has found a really simple, beautiful way to blend community checking, literacy, and Scripture engagement. In their Wednesday night church services, church members will take turns trying to read a verse. Then Benito will read the verse a word at a time with everyone repeating, and then Benito will read the whole verse naturally. And in the community checking sessions, their tendency is to read large sections before focusing on particular verses. For the OBT programs, perhaps at this point, the team might start considering whether transcription activities might be more than practice, but might serve as a future WRBT input. What else might you add? As you can see, I'm lighter on ideas for OBT teams, perhaps because it's just not as easy to do, but also maybe because I don't have enough familiarity with OBT to make many suggestions. In the METPA project, we haven't attempted live back translation and consulting, but others in Mexico have done this. In this setup, the back translator provides a spontaneous back translation to the consultant, and then the two discuss the translation together and possible improvements. In OBT programs, I'm aware of teams that create a written back translation, but this is, as I understand it, more to simplify the consultant's engagement, not the translators. I would recommend prioritizing in-person consultations over Zoom calls, and the least preferable would be consultations through Paratext Notes only. 2 of the 4 teams did their first book consultation via Paratext Notes, and it was difficult for everyone. Of course, budgets and travel schedules make it easiest to do consultation through paratext notes, but there is a cost to this approach. In fairness, in an OBT program, consulting via audio notes is also somewhat impersonal, but paratext notes only is the least relational and the least oral of any consultation mode. While the METPA teams have become increasingly comfortable with consulting through paratext notes only, it's not the recommended method. In OBT programs, I would recommend at this point to begin transcribing the translation with a view to a WRBT. While a WRBT at this stage of consultant checking still has a ways to go with manuscript checking and typesetting, the OBT at this stage, being consultant checked, should not anticipate any further changes to the content and so can begin transcription. For the sake of time, I've left out the publication phase because I don't think anyone wants to do an oral-only manuscript revision. And also because at this point we're getting into all of the different modes, most of them oral, in which we begin to distribute and promote Scripture. So in conclusion, first of all, hopefully I've been able to show that literacy has a real impact on translation quality. Literacy gives us tools to continuously improve our translation draft up until the moment of publication. Second, hopefully I've been able to show by example that in practice, WRBT programs are not purely literate activities deprived of any benefit of oral strategies. While to some extent there is a binary splitting WRBT and OBT programs, there are also many ways in which programs sit on a continuum and how they tackle pieces of the translation process. Our METPA project is a written translation project, but we've also found ways to improve our process with oral techniques and tools. While I genuinely wish we could travel back in time and start the whole translation project with internalization and oral drafting, but we can't do that, I'm also really thankful for the ways in which we've been able to bring oral techniques into our written translation program. So let's have a discussion. Feel free to comment on anything you'd like or ask any question you'd like, but here are a couple prompts. Did I fail to mention a particular way in which literacy contributes to the translation process? What examples are you aware of where WRBT teams use oral tools and techniques to improve their process? What examples are you aware of where OBT teams use literate tools and techniques to improve their process? Thank you.